The librarian came for the blood debt. His newborn granddaughter's shadow was gone by morning. There are debts that do not age. Not in the way we mean when we talk about compound interest or late fees, but structurally, fundamentally. Debts written into agreements that predate every legal system we have invented to protect ourselves from our own desperation. A pact made in a moment of extremity, by a fisherman in a cold season, by a farmer in a drought year, by a mother in a dark room with a sick child, does not expire when the person who made it dies. It transfers. It waits in the bloodline with the patience of something that does not experience time the way its debtors do, until the collector arrives. Ms. Harrow has been the collector for this particular stretch of coastline for longer than anyone in town can remember. She is quiet. She is polite. She never asks for money. Tom Calder refused her. I want you to understand that Tom Calder is not a villain in this story. He is a grandfather who loves his family and has no framework in which the visit of a quiet librarian should constitute a threat. He is precisely the kind of person who gets refused. The debt had been accumulating for 3 generations. Miss Harrow is very thorough. The town of Duncarrick sat on the northeastern Scottish coast in the posture of a place that had been declining for so long it had forgotten what it was declining from. The harbor still functioned, barely. The library still functioned, amply. It was the one building in Duncarrick that remained exactly as it had been in 1953, when it was built, inside and out, every shelf full, every catalog entry in perfect order. The librarian had not changed either, which various people had remarked on over the years, and which no one had remarked on specifically enough to follow to its logical conclusion. Miss Harrow was a small woman in her apparent late 50s, with white hair in a precise bun and the kind of still, measuring gaze that librarians develop across decades, and that something else had arrived with fully formed. She wore the same gray cardigan in every season. She lived, as far as anyone knew, above the library. She had been there when Tom Calder's father was a boy, and she looked now exactly as she had then, which Tom's father had mentioned once, and which Tom had filed in the category of childhood misremembering. She came to his door on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a small leather ledger the color of dried blood. Tom was 68, a retired fisherman with arthritic hands, and a granddaughter 3 weeks old. Isla, the first child of his daughter, Fiona and her husband Grant, born healthy, named for the island his mother had come from. The most recent thing Tom Calder loved in a life that had been, on balance, full of things worth loving. He knew who Miss Harrow was. Everyone in Duncarrick knew who Miss Harrow was, in the way everyone knows the name of the building that stands at the edge of town, without specifically knowing what it's for. She told him, with the pleasant directness of a woman delivering routine information, that his family line carried a debt originating with his great-grandfather, Alistair Calder, who had made an arrangement with the Coven's intermediary in the winter of 1891, following a season of catastrophic fishing loss. The arrangement had been structured as a blood tithe, 1 drop per generation, drawn at the line's strongest point, which in practical terms meant the newest living member. The arrangement had been honored by every subsequent generation. His own father had paid, his mother had paid. The payments were painless. A single drop, barely a pinprick. A small administrative update in the ledger. Tom was the first to refuse. He told her, quietly but with complete finality, that no one was taking anything from his granddaughter. That whatever his great-grandfather had agreed to was not Isla's problem. That she should go away and not come back. Ms. Harrow looked at him for a moment with the specific expression of someone absorbing information they already had. "The debt doesn't require your permission, Mr. Calder," she said. "It requires only the blood. I was offering you the opportunity to provide it yourself, as a courtesy. The courtesy is not required by the terms." He closed the door. The pact that Alistair Calder had signed in 1891 had been drafted by a member of the Duncarrick coven, a woman known locally as the Red Cooper, whose name had been scrubbed from every official record and survived only in the ledger Miss Harrow carried. Its terms were specific in the manner of all serious pact work. A drop of blood per generation, drawn from the youngest living member of the Calder bloodline, to be received by the coven's appointed collector. The blood was not fuel or ingredient. It was acknowledgement, a renewal of the original debt, a small regular confirmation that the lineage understood its obligation. The consequences of refusal were also specific. If the tithe was not freely given, the collector was authorized to receive it by other means, and to collect from every available member of the line until the debt was resolved, oldest to youngest, beginning with the newest edition. The blood tithe is a minor working. What the collector does with a refusal is not. Isla Calder was 3 weeks old when her shadow disappeared. Fiona noticed it at 7 a.m. on the Wednesday after Tom's refusal. Notice the absence of it in the way you notice most subtractions from the world. Not immediately, but in the moment you expect it to be there and find it isn't. The morning light was slanted across the kitchen floor, and Isla was in her bouncer, and there was no shadow beneath her. Fiona picked her up, turned her in the light. Nothing. As though her daughter had become somehow exempt from the ordinary physics of objects and their relationship to light. The baby was fine, warm, feeding well, entirely herself. There was simply no shadow. Fiona called Tom. Tom drove to her house, looked at his granddaughter for a long time in the October morning light, and understood with a physicality that had nothing to do with reason that the woman who had come to his door the previous morning had already begun. He drove to the library. Ms. Harrow was behind the desk, cataloging returns. She looked up with the expression of someone who had been expecting him since yesterday. "Can you give it back?" he asked. "The shadow is held in deposit," she said, pleasantly. "It will be returned when the debt is settled. If the debt continues unpaid, I will collect from the next line member." And the next. "I should tell you, Mr. Calder, that the ledger currently shows 6 living members of your family. What happens when someone loses their shadow? Nothing, for a while. But a person without their shadow eventually becomes..." She tilted her head slightly. "Inconclusive. The shadow is what anchors us here. Without it, the boundary between a person and everything else becomes less certain over time." He asked what she needed. She told him. 1 drop. From the youngest, a pinprick. The debt renewed. The shadow returned. He drove back to Fiona's house. He sat in his daughter's kitchen. Isla was in her bouncer, throwing light in 4 directions except downward. A child-shaped lamp with no darkness. And Tom Calder was 68 years old and had spent a life believing in things he could see and feeling. Now, the specific texture of a world that had been operating on entirely different principles beneath his feet for as long as he'd been standing on it. He said nothing to Fiona. He drove home. The shadow was gone from Grant, Fiona's husband, by Thursday morning. Grant didn't notice it himself. Fiona found it, scanning the kitchen floor with the compulsive attention of someone who has already lost one thing and cannot stop checking for others. She called Tom. He told her not to worry. He would handle it. Tom's neighbor, old Mrs. Parrish, whose family had lived beside the Calders since the 1950s, and who had known Tom's father and his grandfather, came to Tom's door on the Thursday evening with an expression he recognized as the expression people wore in Duncarrick when they knew something they had decided not to know for a long time. "Is it the Harrow woman?" she asked. He said yes. She nodded. "Your grandfather paid," she said. "I remember your grandmother mentioning it. She said it was nothing, a pinprick and then a signature in that book she carries. She said the woman was perfectly pleasant about it." "I know," Tom said. "Are you going to pay?" He didn't answer. By Saturday, Tom's son-in-law Grant had begun having difficulty with doors. Not mechanically. The hinges and latches worked perfectly. But Grant would approach a doorway and hesitate at the threshold with the confused expression of someone who cannot resolve a spatial relationship. They have resolved every day of their life as though the boundary between one room and another had become, briefly, ambiguous. Fiona had begun sleeping with the lights on. Isla remained perfectly healthy, perfectly warm, perfectly herself, casting no shadow and apparently unbothered by its absence. Ms. Harrow came again on Sunday. Tom opened the door before she knocked. She stood on his step in the gray October morning with her ledger and her gray cardigan and an expression that was entirely without malice. The expression of a woman performing a function that has been performed in this town for many generations and which is simply not in the taxonomy of her experience, a matter requiring emotional content. "Your son-in-law?" she said. "I know. And your daughter. By the end of the week, if the debt remains unresolved." He looked at her for a long time. She looked back with the patience of something that does not experience waiting the way he does. "If I pay now," he said, "the shadows come back." "Yes, all of them." "Yes." He looked down at his own shadow on the doorstep, long, clear, stretching behind him in the autumn light. He looked at it the way you look at something you have never looked at before, which is to say the way you look at something you are about to lose. "And if I don't pay," he said, "you work through all 6 of us." "Yes. And then?" "Then," she said pleasantly, "the debt transfers to the generation after, as it always has. Good morning, Mr. Calder." He watched her walk down the path toward the road. He watched his shadow on the doorstep, still there, still his, cast in the ordinary physics of a Sunday morning in October. By the time she reached the road, it had detached. He stood on his own doorstep and watched his shadow walk after her, perfectly shaped, perfectly his, falling behind her feet with the easy regularity of a thing that knows exactly where it belongs and has simply been waiting for its collection. she did not look back. He remained in the doorway, still breathing, still warm, still entirely himself, and felt, beginning in the soles of his feet and spreading upward, the first faint loosening of boundary, the first small ambiguity between himself and everything else. The ledger notation would read, when Ms. Harrow completed it at her desk that evening: Calder line, Generation 4. Tithe refused, involuntary collection completed. Line to continue under standard collection terms. She blotted the ink and shelved the ledger and returned the shadows, because the terms required it. Isla's appeared on the kitchen floor at 7:14 a.m. on Monday morning, clean and ordinary, as though it had never been gone. Grant stopped, hesitating at doorways. Tom Calder sat in his armchair at home and looked at the floor and thought about what would remain with patience and particular attention when the loosening reached its conclusion. The library opened at 9. He refused because he loved his granddaughter, because no one, not a debt, not a pact, not a woman in a gray cardigan with a leather ledger, was getting anywhere near a 3-week-old child. This impulse is the most recognizable thing in the story, the most human. And it is precisely the impulse that the pact was designed to survive. His great-grandfather made the arrangement in a winter of catastrophic fishing loss, which I imagine was genuinely catastrophic. Not a bad season, but an existential one. The kind of loss that threatens everything a family has built. He did what desperate people do. He found the available leverage and he used it. He did not tell his children what he had agreed to. This is, in the long taxonomy of occult horror, the most common failure of them all, not the pact, but the silence that follows it, the debt that passes through generations without context, without warning, without even the simple grace of explanation that might have let Tom Calder make an informed choice at his door. Ms. Harrow is not a monster, she is a collector. She arrives with pleasant directness. She states her terms. She honors her side of the arrangement. She returned the shadows when the involuntary collection was complete, exactly as the terms required. She is in every mechanical sense scrupulously fair. Tom is not in the void. He is in his armchair. He is still breathing. He is simply, very slowly becoming less certain of his edges. Outside his window, the ordinary physics of a Monday morning in Duncarrick proceed without him. The library opens at 9. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Ilara, and I am your whisperer. I'll be here, waiting for you next time. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your stories. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more. This has been Karma Quietly Whispers. See you soon.